As a wounded fan base continues to come to terms with their side's latest capitulation, Ruben Amorim has cast uncertainty over his future at Manchester United after just 3 games of a critical campaign. We're going to touch on it all alongside the futures of Alejandro Garnacho, Rasmus Hojlund, Kobbie Mainoo and Senne Lammens, all on the latest episode of your Theatre of Red. Good afternoon to you all, and welcome to a rather sombre day for Manchester United. In what has become a relatively disgruntled supporter base, end-of-season promises about a halt to the agony and the introduction of a bright future seem to be well and truly forgotten after another miserable evening for Ruben Amorim and his men. There is much to unpack today. And if you thought your working day was difficult, imagine being in my shoes right now. Truthfully, a lack of participation in the Carabao Cup is not the be-all and end-all of a successful season for Manchester United. Naturally, a run to Wembley and silverware is nothing to sneeze at, particularly for a club as down in its fortunes after a 15th place Premier League finish. But success in that competition was never going to be the hallmark of progress at this football club. That said, defeat following the most unacceptable of performances against a side in the 4th tier of English football is just about as forgettable, inexcusable, and utterly embarrassing a situation as any supporter could have wished for. To sit here and say that Grimsby were good value for their win, and anything but that would have been an unjust outcome, that really typifies the magnitude of the issues that we witnessed at Blundell Park. And what we saw on Wednesday evening could not have been further from what we witnessed against Arsenal on the opening weekend. Yes, the outcome was the same in both, and I'm not escaping that. And I'm not pardoning anybody here, because we haven't even begun to digest this yet. But ask yourself this. With respect to Grimsby for the manner of their performance, if United players need a better system or more suitable tactics to beat a League Two opponent, then do these players deserve to wear that shirt in the first place? I know there is regular debate about the suitability of Amorim's tactical philosophy in England and ultimately how this squad is tailor-made for a 4-3-3. In all honesty, the latter is probably a fair assessment on paper. Although the number of successful sides deploying that 3 at the back structure is limited today, I do believe there are layers to these philosophies. And if you listen to this show regularly, as a lot of you appear to do, you'll understand what I mean. I believe that there are layers in philosophies, and the simplest of reasoning stands with the manager's desire for a central defensive option to carry that ball from defence to midfield, which will inadvertently add to the numbers ahead of the defence. But that is a conversation I've had before, and it's a conversation for a different day. The point that I'm trying to get towards here is that given the nature of the players in this multi-million-pound squad, regardless of the structure or the style, there should be more than enough footballing IQ within a group of international footballers to assess the situation on the evening against a far lesser side and take matters into their hands to ensure that they were not humiliated. Forget you and me, the manager, the club, them, because they have a responsibility and a duty of care to that football shirt. I'm sure some of you listening will believe that I'm going down this rabbit hole of defending the manager right now and scapegoating a group of players who fired him under the bus. Now, let me assure you, that is not my intention. Amorim has plenty to answer for after that showing and that result, just as he did following a rather mediocre display against Fulham at a ground that has provided historical success throughout the years for Manchester United. Tactical fascination is one thing, and a stubborn nature to rigidly stick to your belief is an entirely different dynamic. But it is a manager's job to get the best out of his squad and to respond to dire situations at times of need. Against Fulham, we saw substitutions that screamed of containment and holding, and that inadvertently offered pressure and opportunities to the London outfit. While against Grimsby, we saw a complete tactical withdrawal and a focus on getting as many attacking players on the field as possible. But that said, if everything was rosy within this establishment, we should never have encountered the need for the latter at all. Despite what you know is now my affiliation in supporting managers, coaches, players, all often to my detriment. I will not ignore that he has made many mistakes. And this is an inevitable byproduct of his age and his inexperience at the highest level. That goes without saying. It's understandable how tactical errors can be exploited at will against Premier League sides who have a plethora of overpaid stars to call upon. But David Artell did not have that. And his group of players simply outplayed, outfought, and rattled the nerds of a side that are attempting to prove that they deserve to wear the shirt of what is the 20-time English champions. Ultimately, both the manager and the players are to blame, but the lads kicking the football have far too many questions to ask themselves. Look at this from a real broad perspective, and laughably, Harry Maguire made 8 clearances on the night against Grimsby. Now, to put that into perspective, neither Lenny Yoro nor Matthias de Ligt had to make that many clearances against Arsenal or Fulham. So just allow that to sink in when you're considering the performance. We witnessed inexcusable execution across the field with an inability to string 4 or 5 passes together. In attack, it is fantastic to see Mbeumo get off the mark with what was a very well-taken goal. But United created 28 shots. So that is a combined total of 60 since the first ball was kicked against Arsenal. And since that time, we've managed 3 goals, and one of those came courtesy of a Rodrigo Muniz deflection. I'm not saying that we've seen tactical perfection for 270 minutes of football, but we have seen enough to warrant a few more goals. And as we all know, goals change games, and this is a Manchester United side that massively underperformed their expected goals last season. Yes, the fulcrum of the conversation will inevitably return to a midfield duo being overrun by the opposition. However, I am willing to debate with the wall about how a partnership of Kobbie Mainoo and Manuel Ugarte should be more than capable of handling a 4th-tier trio in the centre of the park. And nobody is going to tell me otherwise. Ultimately, with every passing game, it just appears that we are moving in the wrong direction. Naturally, that situation makes it very difficult to make a case for progression with the management team. That's a given. And that's before even having a painful chat about the goalkeeping situation. James Flock got in touch via email this morning, and he wanted to focus on just that. Outside of the obvious pain that he was in, which was clear from reading his message, James asked, at what point is enough actually enough for Andre Onana and Altay Bayindir? Both appear to be enormously limited and incapable of controlling their areas. We've conceded 4 goals from 3 games, and each of them has contributed to 3 of those. Don't even get me started on the attempts to save one of the penalties. Please, tell me that Lammens is a done deal. So, despite everything that's going on and the pain that you have, I do appreciate the time and the effort that probably took, sir. It's a hideous situation, and it's one that presents worry across the board for all of us. I can only imagine the lack of confidence that exists in the defence should the ball manage to pass them, or the complete panic that sets in for corners or crosses into a congested area. You just have to look at the complete calamity that occurs every time the ball is delivered high into the box. But it's so funny because I remember covering the Champions League final when Onana marshalled proceedings with one of the most memorable displays, particularly on the ball. And he left the majority of those watching in complete awe. Now, what we see today is a man that's completely devoid of confidence. He's lacking the self-belief to not only distribute accurately, but complete the role of a goalkeeper in any manner befitting a Manchester United number 1. You look at Bayindir, and for his faults, he appears to possess the same level of issues and anxieties, and neither of them are going to be helped by the daily abuse that they receive. I'm not saying that as a cause of the issues that we see either. It is no excuse. I will say that I agree with Amorim during the post-match comments, in which he stated that this group should have played in such a way that Onana was only focusing on kicking the football and contributing to the build-up phases, rather than having to be as busy as he actually was. Inevitably, it's very difficult to see a long-term future for either, and the consensus that 39-year-old Tom Heaton is the best option is probably not a million miles wrong at this stage. But when you look at what's there an alternative, with Lammens, we know that the clubs are engaged in discussions, and these have advanced towards finalising the guaranteed amount without consideration for the add-ons. However, I also can tell you that Galatasaray are willing to pay more than United up front, and they're also eager to seal a deal. The upside here for United is that we're told Lammens is eager for a move to Old Trafford, regardless of the ongoing issues that we've been discussing, and that he's dreamt of an opportunity to play in the Premier League. I would be very surprised if United don't complete a deal for the goalkeeper. And discussions about outgoings have played a role in holding up guaranteed amounts. I know that some are concerned about further acquisitions when there is such uncertainty regarding the manager's future, but like Dorgu, Cunha, Mbeumo and Sesko, these are all footballers who are more than capable of fitting into an alternative system. And although Amorim gave the green light for Lammens in July, this is a player regarded as one of the brightest prospects in European football, and he would be a target for this Ineos-led hierarchy, with or without our Portuguese man in the hot seat.
It doesn't. In the end, doesn't matter if we recover or not. It's the signs that the team gave during the game, the beginning of the game. So I know that the best team won, the only team that was on the pitch. The best players lose because one team can win against any group of players, and I think that the team and the players spoke really loud today. So that's it, and we lost. The best team won. Let's move on from this day, and I think was really clear for everybody what happened today.
Now, you can interpret that in a number of ways, and the majority of social media has taken his words as an attempt to pardon himself from blame for that performance while throwing his players under the bus. But for me, that is not what he was aiming at. I believe that he was clarifying that the players are unhappy with him and his insistence to remain focused on his playing style. And when you look at it, with the lack of determination throughout the opening half, which was clearly visible in the way that a four-tier side utterly dominated proceedings, I think it's easy to see how he is coming to that interpretation. As I stated last night, I'm quite lucky to have spent ample time working with many individuals at Sporting during the period when Amorim was largely considered the long-term successor to Pep Guardiola at Manchester City. I spent time with the club officials and various fans, everyone from supporter groups to normal match-going folk. Now, there were several factors that resonated with different people, namely pointing towards his nature as a stubborn man who wears his heart on his sleeve, while regularly interacting with the media in a remarkable manner because of his charisma. Now, we've seen this in abundance so far, all of that. However, the crucial factor was that many believed that if he felt his presence jeopardized any project at any club, that he would step up, offer to walk away, and not concern himself with compensation. And he did just that with Casapia in 2018 after only 2 defeats, because after 2 very poor performances, he felt that he had left the club down. Now, I can reveal, having spoken with sources close to Manchester United this morning, I'm told that his stance is similar today as it was last night, albeit not as emotional. Although the board appreciates that change will not occur overnight, he still wants to sit and speak with the squad to determine whether or not they are happy, first and foremost, to continue with him leading them. And if all the players remain on board with the pre-season plans. His words last night were very clear. This is a man who was visibly upset. And while many pick at that while highlighting his inability to watch penalties or set pieces, or spend time fiddling with a magnetic chart when his side crumbles against Grimsby, this is a guy who genuinely cares about his squad, the club, and restoring hope for the supporters. If he feels that he cannot achieve this, he will walk. And we saw an acknowledgement of how he said changing 22 players will not occur. The fundamental question is, can the man achieve his goals with this squad at this time and at this football club? I can't speak on behalf of you, but I saw enough against Arsenal and during the opening 15 minutes against Fulham to suggest that we are seeing something positive. Now, that said, just like you, I was equally concerned with the rest of the trip to Craven Cottage, and Wednesday night offered far more than concern. Ultimately, results will dictate the standing of any manager, And like Eric Ten Hag and all before him, there is only so much that this fan base will tolerate. And that seems to get a little bit smaller with every passing season. It's a sad state of affairs when European football's most glamorous and sought after tactician is being turned into a laughingstock online. But then again, he'll be the first to admit that what we are seeing is far from good enough. And when I look at this and I try to offer my interpretation, I can't see a world where he is not in charge against Burnley. And it would be just like this group to put on an exhibition heading into a 2-week break. But therein lies what happens during that fortnight, with outings against City and Chelsea coming up directly afterwards. But the question for you and every other supporter is, if he does walk, what then happens? When you look at this, who is the next manager to come in and implement their ideals? And how long will that individual be afforded before supporters say enough is enough? What is the expectation of the man? What we have seen from Amorim is obviously not good enough by and large in terms of results. And they're a reminder. But there are many mitigating factors surrounding last season, and they have already been covered to death. We have to look at this season and moving forward. A loss against Arsenal was obviously painful, but we saw more than enough to expect a confident performance in a victory against Fulham. And we saw that in so many of the pre-match score predictions from support. We failed to take early chances against Fulham and ultimately were unimpressive in a draw. However, regardless of everything that we have covered here today so far, and disregarding the 8 changes to highlight that there is indeed quality in reserve, those 11 players should have dealt with Grimsby. And for me, if you are incapable of doing so, you forget the manager. You have to question yourself and ask if you are truly good enough to wear that shirt. The most difficult task for any Manchester United manager, Ruben Amorim or otherwise, isn't teaching these players how to play football. It's getting them to approach every occasion with the same intensity and the required mentality to play at Old Trafford. It's about eradicating toxicity, and that's one thing, but then establishing a set agreement in that dressing room and on that training field that will ultimately transfer over onto the field of play, that you perform the very same way against Grimsby as you do against Arsenal. And that is the ultimate point for consideration here, because we can't go from dominating a title contender to what we saw on Wednesday. And ultimately, that is on the players and the management team. But as we know, so much of the talk before the games centered around Kobbie Mainoo, a lack of playing time, and the nature of his future at the club. Now, he came in for Bruno and was largely tidy. He enjoyed 81 touches with an 82% passing accuracy and also created 2 key opportunities. I don't think anybody questions his ability or the desire of this fan base to retain his services for the foreseeable future, because he is a player who you should build your football club around with an eye on perennial growth and success for years to come. So he came in for the man who is supposedly denying him playing time in Bruno Fernandes, with the Portuguese playmaker then injecting some much needed swagger into the side during his second half cameo. Jerk Coyne got in touch on Twitter about this entire situation, Bruno Mainoo, and he stated, Fernandes started the season exceptionally poorly and looked really distracted and erratic against Fulham in particular. Is it possible that his head has been turned by the continuing Saudi interest? Or is he becoming disillusioned at Manchester United? Additionally, does Ruben need to be more proactive with Bruno in subbing him or benching him when he's out of form? And does he see Kobbie as the long-term successor in that deeper role? And to begin with the start of the question, I don't think his head has been turned any more than it was during the summer, because he was given the opportunity to leave then, and the club told him that they will respect whatever decision he made without forcing his hand. That was clearly viewed as a challenge to the Saudi pursuers, because we must remember, you forget the team when players are linked with a move there, because it all comes down to the Public Investment Fund and their willingness to grow the stature of their division with household names. The club that the player joins is irrelevant. So if it was Club A at the start of the summer and it's now Club B today, the same negotiators are tabling these offers and he's having the same conversations with the same people. Unless something has changed dramatically, I don't think his decision will have changed. As Ben Jacobs confirmed several weeks ago, he made his mind up to stay for at least another season. And who then knows after that? But naturally, of course, he should be treated like any other player and rotated due to form or a lack of it. We know that Bruno is an immense player for Manchester United, but he's not earned a God-given right to be portrayed in a different light, especially when downing another option in Mainoo. With that said, we saw the rotation on Wednesday night and the difference that he provided when he came on in the second half. That too cannot be ignored in these conversations. I've already mentioned Mainoo and the possibility of his departure. So what I can tell you now listening today, from what I'm told, he simply wants a fair opportunity to gain playing time, like any other ambitious player would. He's not keen on warming the bench indefinitely like other players that we have at the club. And I can say categorically, having spoken with sources in Spain, that all of the reports surfacing about La Liga interest this summer have originated in England. So these are generated by the usual names in the UK market, not in Spain. But then saying that, truthfully, what club wouldn't want a player of the profile and potential of Kobbie Mainoo? I'd imagine it's probably easier to list those who wouldn't want him. And another thing I want to touch on, I know we have seen reports suggesting prices and an openness to leave, but I'm saying this to you now as someone who has worked in the industry for many years. I assure you, regardless of public profile of any individual, employees are tasked with generating clicks. And years ago, it was this phrase about paper never refusing ink. But today, it's common knowledge that Manchester United will always gather social traction and clicks. And despite the change of platform, text remains one of the most highly misinterpreted things on the planet. Even rewording information can leave a lasting impression for some. From what I am told, Mainoo is not actively looking to leave, and the club is not actively looking to sell him. They wouldn't have spent so long discussing contractual terms over the last 12 months if that was the case. However, the stance at United, because of 2 decades of Glazer mismanagement, is that every player has a price, and that is what is being disregarded by these reports. That is why we see Alejandro Garnacho on the cusp of departing for Chelsea, and who knows, at the time of listening, this may have already occurred. For a fee, may I add, that is below what the club should be getting for him. But that in itself highlights the magnitude of issues that have been harvested at this football club. I've been told for the last few days that we can expect a fee that could provide a guaranteed figure in around only £35 million, with achievable add-ons as well. But despite anyone's take on the player and his attitude, and the need to get rid of him in an attempt to cleanse, I think we can all agree that another club would get close to double that fee. Moving on, you look at Rasmus Hojlund, and while I won't get into why I believe it is a hideous mistake to part company, he too is on the verge of leaving, with a deal with Napoli all but solidified. So, as I reported last week, barring travesty, Hojlund will depart on a season-long loan to Serie A for a fee in the region of around £3 to £4 million, with United and the player eager to ensure that there is a mandatory purchase for a fee that's been discussed anywhere in the region of £33 to £38 million. Now, Napoli were always eager to achieve this through stipulations that would see an agreed obligation after the player hit achievable metrics. And today, as I'm speaking, it remains to be seen where they have landed at. I'm told that they're now more open to an obligation because of their desire to lure what they view as an extremely talented player who has yet to even scratch the surface of his best years. And I would very much agree with this. On that striker situation, I have time for one more question, and it comes from Molly Hayes, who got in touch about what I can gather from the time period about halfway through the second half on Wednesday night to ask the following. She says, "Hey Shaun, you went heavy on the worries about expectations on Sesko before his arrival, and I'm already seeing people beginning to question his ability in England. How do you feel after watching him this evening?" Well, Molly, thanks for getting in touch, and my stance hasn't changed here at all. I value the boy as a superb talent with a huge ceiling. But as I said on previous episodes and in a handful of articles, the club were not buying the ready-made answer to a number 9 dilemma. We can see that he is raw, and there is much to learn, but that in itself buys in with the worries that I had from day one. Make no mistake, I still support Sesko implicitly, and I cannot wait for him to hit his first for the club. But the growing concern in the fan base regarding poor results will always land on agendas and unfair expectations. We can see this building with every appearance, albeit it's only 3, and that will continue to happen, just as it did with Hojlund. Now, look, I know I said I wouldn't get into that debate, but the logic behind selling a youngster who had 2 years to grow within the harsh reality of England and then replace him with another youngster who had no idea how difficult it would be just makes such little sense to me. That said, we are where we are. And I would urge you listening right now and the entire fan base to get behind Sesko as much as possible, because we need to aid with building with his confidence, because God knows the rest of the league and the media will do their best to see him fail. And that is an absolute certainty. So ahead of Burnley and before a 2-week break and the closure of this transfer window, there is so much yet to occur at this football club. And not disregarding the many problems, but it is imperative that we see a promising performance and a very good result against a newly promoted side in what I do very much hope is not Amorim's final game at the club. But as we know, that's just me. So as always, thank you for lending me your ear after forgettable midweek display. It is always massively appreciated. I want to ask, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe wherever you're listening today. And if you wouldn't mind dropping a quick review to help to build the brand. I can see from the analytics in this messy side of the background that our Spotify reviews are growing continuously, and that's fantastic. So thank you massively for that. But despite very similar listenership on Apple, there's very little responses there. So if I can be as bold and as cheeky today as to ask every one of you listening on Apple to help out there, it takes a couple of seconds and it would mean the world to me. So from that, be sure and get in touch in any of our social channels. Visit the website at theatre-of-red.com for daily articles directly from Carrington and some great feature pieces from some new up-and-coming writers on this scene. And until we speak again, do stay safe. Have a fantastic week. Much love to each and every single one of you.